Welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast, where we visit with leaders who are shaping, innovating, and disrupting technical education. People who are not afraid to think differently, not afraid to try something new, all with the goal of securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. It's Matt Kirkner, your host for the Tech Ed Podcast. We have a great guest we're going to introduce in just a moment to you this week. But before we do that, for those of you who are regular listeners to our podcast, you know that I'm a resident of the Midwestern United States. I've spent my entire life and career here. And more specifically, I have spent my entire life and career in and around the city of Milwaukee. You also know that I'm a fairly big sports fan. And I can tell you that living here in the city of Milwaukee, it is impossible to be both a sports fan and a Milwaukeean without being a huge fan of the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, I have been watching Milwaukee Bucks basketball for my entire life. That goes back to great players in the 80s with names like Junior Bridgman, Quinn Buckner, Bob Lanier, Sidney Moncrief. And I even remember a little bit the days of people like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Johnny Mack and the Big O. It is an amazing history that Milwaukee Bucks basketball has here in my hometown of Milwaukee. Well, now the names have changed. They've changed to names like Giannis and Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton and Bobby Portis. But the love of a city for its basketball team remains as strong, if not stronger, than it's ever been. So for me, for the city of Milwaukee, imagine how good it feels to say the words NBA champion Milwaukee Bucks. That's right after a drought of nearly 50 years. The Bucks are on top of the NBA once again. And that is why I am really, really excited to introduce the guest that we have along with us for you today. It's a gentleman by the name of Robert Cordova. Now, most of us, when we think about professional sports, we think about what happens on the field. We think about what happens on the court. We think about coaching. We think about execution. We think about amazing feats of athletic performance. But there's a reason they call it a sports franchise, and that franchise part is equally as important as what happens on the court. We're going to talk all about that today with Robert Cordova, the Chief Technology Officer of, yes, I'll say it again, the NBA champion Milwaukee Bucks. Robert, thank you so much for joining us on the Tech Ed Podcast.
Hey, Matt, it's great to be here. And yeah, really exciting year for the Milwaukee Bucks. And not that the job wasn't great to begin with, but that really has made it outstanding. And I think we have about 180 more days of calling ourselves the champs, and maybe we'll extend that even more. So great to be here.
Fingers crossed that we do extend that even more, but let's take advantage of every one of those days and commit to reminding the world that you are indeed NBA champions. And congratulations on that, by the way. Congratulations also on having just an incredible job, an incredible career as Chief Technology of the Milwaukee Bucks. For our listeners who may not be completely familiar with what that role entails, tell us a little bit about what you do.
So as Chief Technology and Strategy Officer, and I'll talk about the strategy part of the job too, I would say there's three legs on my stool, right? One, and let's break down the actual words, right? Information technology, right? Getting information to the right people at the right times, right? So IT, what we all call IT. And oftentimes we kind of get mixed up in like, oh, it's your laptop. Well, it's all about productivity, and really the way that you can be the most productive is having the most intelligence and knowledge about what you should be doing to advance the business, right? And the Milwaukee Bucks, like you did say, we are a business. Obviously, it's a really fun, entertaining business, and our business is sports and entertainment. We own Fiserv Forum, our 3.5-year-old arena, but the business really is what sustains it, right? So on information technology, it's all about making sure that we have the right tools in place to make our employees the most productive. So that's like the CIO hat, if you will. The other part of it, and I know that you're from the manufacturing world out there, but when I took this job, I had never worked in sports. I had never been responsible for $60 million of technology at Fiserv Forum. And when I thought about it, I went back to my days when I worked for Sara Lee, and I worked for our VP of all the bread plants. We had about 40 bread plants there. And there was this division between the IT people at corporate and the what was called the operation technology, the OT people at all these plants, because they had to make sure that cheesecakes, that those loaves of bread, I mean, no matter what, they had to make the bread, right? And so technology played a big role there, but that was operation technology. And it was a little bit different, not just the fact that it really wasn't about information, but it was really about production. But more importantly, the type of person that you want on an OT team is going to be able to work under pressure and get things duct taped, because the show must go on when you're at Fiserv Forum, right? So I thought about Fiserv Forum as a factory of events, right? The event, the basketball games, the concerts, those are all events. I saw it as a factory of events, and I thought about it from an OT standpoint. So I have this great OT team that really runs all the technology at Fiserv Forum. And then the third leg of my stool is really around business intelligence, business analytics. And it's really about how do we use data to drive our business the right way? How do we democratize data? So back to that IT piece of it, we can pull the best insights of patterns that you might not recognize from common sense.
You know, it's interesting. IT, OT, business intelligence, all the convergences we see. You know, I'm glad you brought up the analogy or the alignment to manufacturing. We talk about so many of the topics that you just covered in that last answer, Robert, the overlap now of IT and OT and manufacturing. I love your idea of calling the Fiserv Forum the factory of events. So it's going to be interesting, I think, to explore the way some of these convergences take place. And in as much as you've got an amazing role as Chief Technology and Strategy Officer, as you point out, of the Milwaukee Bucks. And that is on the athletic and on the sports franchise side of the world, all the commonalities with things like industry and manufacturing. So you did point out that strategy is a huge part of your role. Talk a little bit about how technology influences the Bucks' overall strategy.
Sure. So yeah, my first year here was purely a CTO, and then my boss, the president of the Bucks, he saw that, you know, technology touches really every part of the business, right? And he saw that I liked the business side of things because I'd been around the block a few times. So really on the strategy side, it's all about, you know, where are we going? So think about the watch parties that we had outside Fiserv Forum when we made that championship run. We had tens of thousands of our fans, our guests out there on our plaza in front of Fiserv Forum. It was one of those, you know, moments in time where it's like, wow, we actually built this plaza and people did fill it up. But then it's like, okay, that's fantastic. We're on the world stage. Isn't this great? Well, we don't know any of the people out there, right? Like unless we went around with a clipboard, we wouldn't know that Matt was there, that Joe Smith was there, you know? And so when we think about that, it's like, boy, like how can we get to know who those fans are? So we can engage with them more, because obviously they want to be part of the Bucks community. And so it's one of those things where we always ask, you know, can technology help us here, right? So whether that's digital technology for, you know, QR codes, or somebody that wants to use maybe a special private cellular LTE called the Bucks Network, whatever it is, how can we engage those fans of ours, not just the ones that we know who bought the tickets to the seats, but those fans outside in front, and to tell you the truth, fans throughout the world now, right? So when you think about my role, you know, it's always trying to think about how can technology be a key enabler to the lines of business.
Absolutely. You talk about this whole idea of not just being a key enabler, but to the lines of business, but also driving engagement among your customers, among your stakeholders. And you're right. I mean, just watching what happened at Fiserv Forum, watching what happened in what we call the Deer District here in the city of Milwaukee was just fascinating. You know, who would have guessed, by the way, that a career in manufacturing and industry, in your case, on the food production side of manufacturing, would lead to the amazing job that so many people in your role with your aptitudes and competencies would dream of having. So tell our audience about your career pathway. Tell us about your education, a little bit more color on the different jobs and careers you had along the way to becoming the Chief Technology and Strategy Officer of the Milwaukee Bucks.
I guess I had the epiphany when I was about 13 years old. I didn't love school, so I was probably in front of my 8th grade school with my friends, and we probably were ditching class or whatever. And a school bus pulls up at about 11 o'clock in the morning, and all these classmates of ours get on the school bus, and then it takes off. Later on, I found out that those were the, quote unquote, smart kids that were going to the local high school to learn pre-algebra. And something clicked in me at that point where, like, if I don't really start to embrace school and really start to, develop myself, I'll never get on that bus, right? So the proverbial bus. So that really kind of got me aligned with investing in the work that it takes to become a good student within a school. And then that got me to a private high school. And then the private high school got me to a good college. And I got an electrical engineering degree in 1984, Yale College. And from there, really what it was that drove me into electrical engineering was really my curiosity about how these amazing things like 30 transistors on a piece of silicon the size of your fingernail, like how can that be? And so it was just that curiosity of wanting to know how things work, how things like that can actually take place. And that's really what got me deep in the weeds of electrical engineering, microchip design, laying out little micron transistors on that silicon substrate. So I came out of school as an electrical engineer, and I went into aerospace engineering in Los Angeles, my hometown. And I was designing image processing chipsets, Fourier transforms, which was used in submarine warfare. So it was a lot of Department of Defense projects during like the last years of the Cold War. So I was just deep in the weeds. And why I bring that up is because throughout my career path, I kind of went from that deep in the weeds engineer and by nature an introvert, which is fine, but trying to stretch myself throughout my technology career. At the end of it, I wound up as essentially in the sales teams at AT&T. And so in between that deep in the weeds engineer, I did a number of jobs. I worked for CenturyLink in telecom right when the net was first becoming commercialized in the late 90s. I started a .com in the early 2000s, which was called maxfootball.com. And we were one of the first ones to really stream content of sports. And then that led to, I did mobile application development for the BlackBerry, if you want to age myself. And that's kind of caught the attention of the CIO at Sara Lee, because they were using these BlackBerries with my software to actually go into new markets there. And so he hired me to run all of his mobile solutions at all the plants and for all the bread manufacturing, coffee manufacturing. Then when Sara Lee was starting to sell parts and pieces off, my team had done a project with AT&T on the bread truck devices, mobile devices. So they recruited me to come work with them as an evangelist of AT&T technology. So I went into sales, and I had always been afraid of sales because presenting to large groups and being that person in the room that has to really engage everybody, that was a stretch goal. And so I did sales for AT&T for 8 years. Essentially, I was a CTO for the sales GM for the Midwest. So this goes from that deep in the weeds electrical engineer to the seemingly extroverted sales guy at AT&T. And then the Bucks recruited me, and I think it was because of all those different skill sets that I had developed. I've used them all here very, very much. So that's kind of my path that got me to the Bucks. And where I thought I was a jack of all trades, master of none, actually that jack of all trades has really helped me tremendously build my team here and really help the Bucks succeed on multiple fronts.
Yeah, help them succeed. You certainly did. You know, of all the places I didn't think a discussion with the CTSO from the Milwaukee Bucks would go, BlackBerry. You know, I'm still a big fan of RIM. I admit that I kind of miss my BlackBerry a little bit. I love that keyboard, microprocessors. I lived through a lot of that as well. Didn't expect to get through or to get into that discussion. Submarine warfare, I didn't think that would come up either. But here we are, and all of those amazing experiences. If there's one message, and I think there were a number of them buried in that discussion for our listeners, especially young people considering future careers, it's that you can go all kinds of directions, and making a career choice is not the end of where you're going to end up. It's absolutely the beginning. And the key is to open up as many opportunities as you can for yourself. And you have certainly done that. We also tell young people you can be an introvert and function as an extrovert if the goal is big enough. And so I'm the same way by nature. I'm a little bit introverted myself, which surprises people. But if whatever you're going after is big enough, you can function as an extrovert for certain periods of time. Agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Like my wife is much more of an extrovert in a social environment. She like gains energy from that, right? It's great for her. For me, it's great too, but it drains me by the end of it. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh, like that was a lot. And, she wants to keep going. So it's just, I think the bottom line there is that sometimes our educational system may value extroverts more than introverts. But I think we are finally realizing, especially with all the, blockchain and all these technologies, I think society kind of recognizes the value of the people that kind of take that walk in the woods and kind of think up ideas and things.
That's great to see that change and thinking taking place. So all kinds of topics we didn't know we were going to get into today, but I'm glad that we did. One topic that I absolutely knew we were going to get into today is the 2021 NBA championship for the Milwaukee Bucks. What an amazing time, an amazing experience for your franchise, for your players, for your coaches, for all of your employees, and certainly for the entire city of Milwaukee, the state of Wisconsin. A wonderful, wonderful time. Tell us a little bit about the years leading up to that 2021 NBA championship. That didn't happen without a tremendous amount of work, a tremendous amount of strategy, and a tremendous amount of commitment, both on the part of the Milwaukee Bucks to the city of Milwaukee, and I would say on the part of the city to the franchise. What did it take to keep the Bucks here in Milwaukee?
Sure. I mean, I think it's such a great story in that the team was sold about 8 years ago now. So when Senator Cole sold the team to a group from New York, the NBA was really saying, hey, there's some criteria here that has to be met, some stipulations if you want to keep the team in Milwaukee, right? So one of them was you need to build a brand new state-of-the-art arena. And, we already had the Bradley Center was built, I believe, went live in 87. So, that was getting old. It was one of the older arenas that were out there. And so that's why the NBA wanted a new one as part of the deal, right? And as we all know, there's a long line of other towns that would love to have an NBA team. So the city and state came together. And this kind of goes back to I didn't know who he was, but apparently John Norquist was the mayor back in the day. That he kind of saw that this elevated freeway called Park West was really creating blight in the town of Milwaukee. And he wanted it to be torn down, and it was torn down eventually. And that land wasn't used for years. And so finally it was given to the Milwaukee Bucks. And so we got 30 acres of essentially downtown land to develop what's known as the Deer District now, right? So on that land, that was really the key. We got 30 acres of land to essentially build up, develop, monetize, and really build. So the first things that we did is we built a state-of-the-art training facility where the team could practice. And then we built Fiserv Forum. Then we built a plaza in front of Fiserv Forum. Then we built retail outside of that. And we're about halfway through developing the 30 acres of land. But those are the key pieces that you saw during the championship run on TV. But that was really, talk about the rocket fuel to just really build a renovated franchise from the old Milwaukee Bucks. That's kind of what we've been able to do.
Just an incredible facility that you built and that you're continuing to build. So just an incredible story there. We could take up an entire episode on that, but I want to continue to dig into this NBA championship run, especially Game 6. The words Bucks in 6 mean a tremendous amount to just about everybody in the city of Milwaukee, the state of Wisconsin, and winning Game 6 at home. You were right in the center of that. Tell us about that experience from the perspective of a user, the thousands and thousands of fans that were experiencing that event, both inside Fiserv Forum, outside in the Deer District that we've already talked about. What was that like to go through that experience for a fan and for you, Robert?
Yes. So as a fan of the Bucks, right? Just the electric environment of really Milwaukee coming together inside the four walls of Fiserv Forum, outside the four walls of Fiserv Forum, coming together in such like a positive, healthy way. And that was just indescribable, right? Just, it couldn't have worked out any better than it did. And then also after the championship, the being on top of a double-decker bus in the Milwaukee Bucks championship parade going through downtown with the crowds there. It was just like, I mean, it was surrealistic, man. I'll never forget that time. But back to like the business of the Bucks, right? It was one of those points in time where, you know, you're crossing your fingers at the extra $30 million that you invested in building out this plaza, building out these retail restaurants and bars and things in front of Fiserv Forum, that actually they'll be used. So seeing, and I've heard different numbers from 40,000 to 80,000, but seeing that number of people out front using what we built was one of those build it and they will come. Well, they did come in mass, right? And it was such a nice thing having come like after a really wonky year and a half of the pandemic. Also the pandemic, we had high hopes that when the Democratic National Convention was going to be held at Fiserv Forum and the Wisconsin Center District, you know, we would be on the world stage for the DNC. That was going to be great. That didn't occur like that, right? So we really weren't on the world stage there, but we are probably having the Bucks go all the way tenfold the world stage, right? So having ESPN broadcast from on top of one of our restaurants, having Good Morning America broadcast from the balcony of Punch Bowl Social. We were on the world stage, and I think that really kind of built the excitement of coming to the Deer District and experiencing that. And then afterwards, started to travel after the championship, California, Las Vegas, Buffalo, New York, various places. People were telling me about the Deer District. I didn't have to explain what it was. I didn't have to explain where Milwaukee was. And so that was, you know, from a business perspective and from a boy, we have built some real goodwill here. The city has, the state has, the Bucks have. That felt so good.
You know, we've talked now about that experience of seeing the Bucks win games, the energy that was around that experience, whether, like you said, 40,000, 80,000, just the incredible number of people that were converging on downtown Milwaukee to be a part of this experience, and not just for the final game, but throughout the playoffs, and not just necessarily in that season, but in preceding seasons. So just that the energy and that lasting effect for the city, obviously something that we'll never forget, and we're fingers crossed won't have to wait another 50 years to experience again. Something less than that would be just awesome. So let's talk about that time now leading up to the championship. You've covered some of the investments that the Bucks have made and some of the strategy that went into creating this amazing result. What would you add, Robert, in terms of what it took your team to make all of that come together?
Sure. I said prior that, you know, there's about $60 million of technology within Fiserv Forum and the Deer District. So whether it's the digital signage, the huge center hung LED display, all the 850 IPTV screens that show replays, and the food menu boards over concessions and where to go when you come in the doors, the network, the connectivity, which is probably the most important piece of the technology for our guests, right? You know, we have amazing cellular connectivity. So all this stuff has to work, right? And as I said, an OT team has a different mindset of just making sure that things work, and there's going to always be problems, and we got to still make sure that you can work through those pretty fast. So really a big part of it is in preparing for a championship run. You're kind of going through the playoff games, and every time you get to the next round, there's a little more attention on you. There's a little more national attention on you, worldwide attention. And so really what that creates is like, now you're going to build media compounds. Instead of having a media room, you literally have to have a media compound outside of Fiserv Forum to host all the broadcasters and news teams. You have to have an NBA league compound out there because all the league is here. I mean, this is our big event of the year, right? So all those people, all those endpoint technology pieces, cameras, computers, phones, they all need connectivity. And so a lot of times that's cable connectivity. So you have to make sure that you're running all the connections to the cameras out on the plaza for Good Morning America, for ESPN. And if one of those lines breaks, there best be a redundant line, right? So you're having to really engineer, because these events, we don't get them a lot, right? And there's very few folks that get these types of events, but you really go over and beyond planning for them, making sure that it's highly redundant, to use a real tech term, high availability, and really putting that all in place And then obviously having to communicate how things need to work. Lots of walkie-talkies going around. They have to be able to work. So, my team of like 20 people, really, it was like around the clock effort for the 8 weeks there. But really, it builds up as you get into that championship game because these compounds grow and there's more and more to do with broadcasting and connectivity. But that is like the main thing.
So here you are. Yeah, Robert Cordova, Chief Technology and Strategy Officer for the Milwaukee Bucks. You're trying to, like the rest of us, enjoy an NBA championship season, enjoy this whole process. And at the same time, you're on the edge of your seat. While we're on the edge of our seats thinking what's going to happen on the next play, you're on the edge of your seat saying we have to make sure we maintain all this connectivity. And if something isn't working exactly correctly, what are we going to do to take action to make sure that we get that back on track? Just a tremendous amount of stress, I would think, going through that whole entire process, but so very important to make sure everything stays connected. The technology is working as we're transferring more and more video, more and more information, more and more data to make that user experience, whether it's a fan inside Fiserv Forum or somebody watching at home, the absolute best that it can be. All this connectivity and all this data, leads me to another topic and question, Robert. We talk a lot here on the Tech Ed podcast about things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, the sea of data that just every enterprise is swimming in, not just professional sports, but every single enterprise. Doesn't matter what business you're in. Data analytics is becoming prolific in professional sports, not just basketball, but certainly basketball. Tell our audience a bit about how the NBA teams are using technology, using data analytics to prepare their game plans.
So that's kind of like that's the really intriguing, sexy part of the technology world, right? Is actually the data that impacts the team, right? And allows our coaches, our performance executives to really tune up the team and get the most out of the team and win a championship, right? So I'll just kind of hit on a few things here. Like one of the current things that's in style right now is this whole thing around spatial analytics, right? So what that means is that every NBA arena has optical gear in the catwalk, so above the court. And that optical gear records the movement, the XY Cartesian coordinate of every player on the court 20 times per second. And it records where the basketball is during 20 times a second as well. So at the end of a game, we have access to all this information, not just for the Bucks games. Every team has access to this information for every other game being played. So now you are ingesting this spatial information. Well, think about the things you can do with that, right? So we have a basketball analytics team, and they are looking at it. So let's think of a few things, right? If you can recognize a pattern, that's probably a play, right? So hey, we're going to play the Knicks tonight. Like last week, what plays were they? Can we pull out the kind of the new plays, the old plays, what worked? And you can kind of see what works if that basketball goes into the hoop or gets close to the hoop. And you can coordinate that with the score of the game to see if it made the basket or not. And so we obviously have all these statistics, but then there's things like, in physics, force times distance equals work, right? That's a basic physics equation. Well, which team worked more for the win? Well, you want to be the team that works less, but still gets that win, right? So you can do things like those kind of input output histograms and things like that. There's a whole new science around this spatial analytics. And then the last thing I'll touch on that is what it can also tell you is almost from a regression testing sort of thing, like in a Markovian model of which way to turn, it could help you invent new plays. So these are all things that we have the data scientists, guys a lot smarter than me, thinking into this and like how to really leverage this in an actionable way. Like you can't get so into it that it doesn't amount to much for an actual player, right? A human doing things and a coach coaching things. But if you can take out a few of these things, so we get that advantage, and it's a fair advantage because everybody has access to all this information.
It's going to be interesting to see how that continues to evolve. We have a term we use often here on the Tech Ed podcast that we actually trademarked ourselves called inform-actionable data. And it kind of touches on what you just covered, which is we've got a sea of data and we can use that for all kinds of endeavors. But the truth of the matter is there's a limited amount of that that's actually going to drive improvement and drive performance. And it's really figuring out where that data that we have available to us aligns with how we drive better, in this case, better execution on the basketball court. That's really, really fascinating to me. So how do we in your case, use regression to figure out where are we going to make the best use of the data that we have available to us. Just another observation on what we talked about. When you mentioned spatial analytics and you talk about having cameras up on the catwalks that are shooting down at the basketball court, using XY coordinates, Cartesian coordinates to determine the motion of the players, that's the same technology we use in CNC, or at least the same thought process. It's the same thought process that we use in robotics. And so here again, it's amazing how some of these competencies that a student might be learning in a technical education course, for instance, port themselves over into this whole world of data analytics and how often these things converge and cross over. So we're going to have you back at some point and have a whole discussion around the use of data, because there was about 8 or 9 questions that spurred out of that last discussion we have. So we'll look forward to doing that. I want to change our discussion a little bit now to technology careers. I want to talk about this term technologist. What makes a good technologist, and what is the importance of curiosity in the workplace today?
So there's this term CQ that I think John Friedman from the New York Times kind of came up with. And I love the whole idea. So obviously, when you have a team of technical professionals, you want pretty high IQ people to really figure stuff out and keep things going the right way. But, as we all know, technology changes so often and so fast, right? That you have to have what's called CQ, a curiosity quotient. So you have to be naturally curious about how things work. Like I talked about the number of transistors on that silicon, like, hey, how does that work? And you want to tear into it. And that kind of has to be part of your core, in my opinion, to be a good technologist. The second part of it is really about the business. Technology is very cool stuff, but you have to be able to apply it, right? It's really what I call the why. So it needs to be doing something positive for the team, for the business, for something. So you really need to understand the why before you really think of the what. So what is the problem that they're trying to solve? What are their objectives from the line of business? And can technology help them get that in a more effective, efficient way? And this is probably the trickiest thing, is technology can be so disruptive, so transformational that the business doesn't even know. They don't know what they don't know. Part of that curiosity quotient has to be looking around the corner. So you've also got to stay looking way out ahead and making sure that you know the things that can really transform a business. And what I'll end on it is the ability to actually take technology and implement it and operate it. And so that was one of the pieces when I talk about the OT team, that it's really, sure, you just deployed this great IPTV system, but did you plan on actually operating that in a way? So that's kind of, sometimes seen as like the boring part is the operate, but no, that's so important to operate all of these different technologies so that they continue to operate and that they stay valuable to both your employees and to your consumers.
So to use a term that our listeners in industry, our listeners in manufacturing are probably familiar with, and to draw another parallel, by the way, between the discussion we're having in that world, this idea of design for manufacturability. In other words, when we're designing a part and we're designing a process, we want to really put into thought, how can we most efficiently design both of them so that we can take waste out of that process? And in many ways, you're talking about the same thing. It's one thing to understand technology. It's one thing to be able to integrate and implement it. But let's think through, how are people actually going to use this? How are they going to consume the content that results as an outcome of integrating that technology, as equally, if not more important than just the implementation side on its own? I think that's a really, really good message, especially for young people entering their careers in technology, entering STEM careers. Let's talk about those folks for just a minute. I'll just start by saying this. I'm sure people probably tell you all the time, you have their dream job, right? I mean, if you're a young person growing up and you were like me, you liked sports, but you were never going to be a professional anything in the world of athletics, but you want to find a way into the business of professional sports. There's a lot of young people that dream of those types of careers. Maybe they don't dream of entering those careers through STEM or through technology. So what are some ways, Robert, that if you're a young person interested in technology or interested in science and engineering and math, that you could find your way to a career in professional sports without being an athlete?
Sure. So what I tell young folks is a great way of going about it is to go look at the job boards that sports teams have. Those could be around sales jobs, technology jobs, IT jobs, all kinds of jobs, right? Go look at like what kind of jobs are in need right now, right? And that's one great way to get an insight into maybe where to kind of steer your own educational path. So that's one part of it. Another part of it that I've seen firsthand, like on my team, not everybody has a completely technical background. Maybe someone starts off in sales, ticket sales, and they just have an aptitude for the data piece of it or for the productivity IT piece of it. And they start to like evolve themselves and then they hop across to IT. So I've had that occur too, especially within my BI team, where you had, maybe not the best salesperson, but they definitely got into the CRM software and the tool and the business rules. And they became one of my business analysts on my IT team for that CRM tool. And then I know on our digital team, and the way I describe digital is kind of the convergence of technology and marketing, right? So our websites, our mobile app, all those digital touch points for our fans and for our guests. I know some of those digital people may have come from a marketing background and then got a little more techie, right? So it's really, you don't have to start off as a technologist to really get into the jobs, but eventually you need to at least learn it and understand it, whether that's self-taught or through school. And then the last thing is I had a mentee here at the Bucks, and she was trying to get a PR job for a team. And she just wrote a letter into the Bucks, and it got to the desk of our chief communications officer. And it explained in this one pager why she wanted to work in PR and what she could offer there. And she got an internship and became a great resource here at the Bucks. So those are like the stories that you can come at it from a bunch of ways, but it really comes down to, determination and persistence, right? Which is a great way of saying it.
Absolutely. Determination and persistence always or almost always pays off. And if you're looking for a career in the world of professional athletics and you're not going to be an athlete, you want to have a job on the business side, and you've got a technology or STEM background, particularly looking at the web, various paths through a professional franchise into positions of leadership, into positions of technology, starting out selling tickets and proving yourself in a venue like that and moving up through the organization. And you talked about just putting yourself out there about this individual who ended up in this PR job and an internship because she took the time and was conscientious enough to tell her story, to show that she was passionate about it. So really interesting ways that students and people of all ages, if they're interested, can find ways into the world of professional sports. So now let's talk about education itself. And if I'm a K-12 district and I want to get more and more students curious about technology and STEM, you've talked, Robert, about how important that curiosity was to you, the curiosity of understanding a transistor, of understanding an IC chip, as we called them back in the days, and the importance of the curiosity quotient. If I'm a K-12 district, what are some of those ways that I can get students curious about technology and STEM?
Sure. So, I always go back to like applied science, right? Which is essentially like there are some theoretical mathematicians, theoretical scientists, theoretical physicists, and God bless them all because that's amazing that they can think in their brain about these laws. But the way that I learn, at least that I've learned anecdotally, is if I can apply it to my real life, the real world, then it makes sense, right? If I could apply algebra, which could seem so boring and like foreign to me, but in the real world of how it impacts my life and how I do things, I think you've just made the turning point in a young person's mind, right? So I'm all about applied learning, to learn math in a way where it's real world. You're counting real things on a farm, or you're counting real speed of a car in a city, something that is really applying it where you can have those aha moments, in my opinion, easier because it actually, you can go touch it, feel it, and experience it.
As we think about education in general and that importance of applied learning, I'm the biggest advocate in the world for that. I could sit in a classroom growing up. You said you weren't really crazy about school as a 13-year-old. I wasn't either. I wasn't crazy about it as a 14 or 15-year-old either, but that's a different story. But as soon as I could get my hands on something, going to art class, go to gym where we actually got to move and be engaged and do, even band where you were busy doing something and not just listening to a lecture. That's not the case for everybody. But for me, I learned so much better in a hands-on applied environment. I think that's especially true, by the way, of people who get excited and interested excited about and interested in STEM and technology. They tend to be hands-on people. They tend to like to make and build and create. And then we sit them in a classroom and make them learn calculus from a whiteboard. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. So you and I are 100% aligned on applied learning and the importance of that. Now, I know you're not just about talk when it comes to engaging with and improving K-12. The Bucks organization has taken on a number of endeavors to do that. Talk to us just a short bit about some of the great work that the Bucks organization is doing to partner with K-12, particularly in Milwaukee and in the state of Wisconsin.
So we have a nonprofit, the Milwaukee Bucks Foundation. So they do a lot of outreach. So that's where, we're the biggest fans of our hometown here, right? We want to see it improve. We want to be part of the change. So we do it all through our foundation. And so when it comes to STEM, some of the current programs we work with, like the local group, Sharp Literacy, through our own partnership with one of our greatest sponsors / partners, Fiserv. And so Fiserv and us partner with Sharp Literacy to really evangelize STEM through the Design Through Code program, which really targets the 4th and 5th grade. So some people from my team work with those teachers, with those schools, but it's really about exposing them in a very engaging, applied way so that they learn about, what coding means, the mystery behind it, the magic behind it. This can be really fun, right? It doesn't have to be like, oh, this is so hard. So that's really what we do there. We have other programs as well. You may have heard of NBA Math Hoops. So we partner with SC Johnson here from Racine with really putting that NBA Math Hoops program out there, also from 4th to 8th grade classes at schools. So, and that's just a really fun, engaging way to learn math, because it's essentially a board game, a basketball board game, right? So talk about applied, right? Well, they're applying it to a basketball game. Like, how cool is that? So one of those things where we're trying to find ways, different groups that we can partner with to really scale ourselves and our impact throughout Milwaukee and the state. And those are just two examples of kind of what we're doing.
So tremendous impact on the state of Wisconsin, on the city of Milwaukee, not just through basketball excellence, but through amazing partnerships, through encouraging and inspiring young people around math, around STEM, around coding. Really, really important work, and you and the entire organization deserve credit for that, Robert Cordova. We've got one final question for you as we close out our time, and it's a question we ask every single one of our guests here on the Tech Ed podcast. And you've talked a lot about how young people should be thinking about careers, how they should be thinking about opportunities, how they can come about and find those opportunities as they enter the workforce. If you could give one piece of advice to a young individual who's a high school sophomore as they consider their future, what would it be?
I would say find a mentor. And the way I say that is that professionals like myself, like you, Matt, we want to help the young folks out there. So when I was a young man, I never found one because I thought, like, why would that person want to help me? They don't know me. They're probably busy with their job. I mean, I made up so many excuses in my head that I didn't really go out there and find leaders out there and advocates that could really help me just explain the maze that you're going through. We want to help the young persons out there. So, but the initiative has to come from that young person, and go search out a mentor, an advocate, because they want to help you, even if they don't know you from the next person. If they even see you make the effort of trying to engage, wanting to improve yourself, wanting to figure out the adult world, grab somebody, grab a dozen people, and I guarantee you, you're going to get a couple of mentors in that group that will be your personal advocate.
I like the way you put that. Don't assume that people don't want to help you. Assume that they do. And most of them probably do. And I know from getting to know the kind of person you are, Robert, that you would jump at that opportunity to help a young person. And I'm the same way. I would tell you that most of the people that I know that are probably in our same age demographic and have maybe had a little bit of experience and some bumps and bruises along the way are more than happy to share what we know. So great advice for high school sophomores. Find a mentor, find somebody you can model yourself after, find somebody who can coach you on whatever comes next. It's been just a really interesting, wonderful conversation with you, Robert, as we've spent some time here together. Robert Cordova, the Chief Technology and Strategy Officer for the NBA champion. I'll say it one last time, Milwaukee Bucks. And let's hope that we can do that again. Best wishes for the rest of the season. You're a fascinating person, a wonderful guest. We really appreciate you being with us.
Thank you so much, Matt. Great to be here, and can't wait for the next one. Go Bucks!
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe, leave a review, and if you like this episode, share it with a friend. New episodes launch every Tuesday, so listen in next week.